Oh my goodness. Now I think you figured out our theme for today. Oh, it's more than thank you, it's gratitude. Thank you is a one-time thing. We can say that in about 2 seconds, right? But gratitude is something we do all day long, and that's what Jesus was talking about in our reading this morning. Thank you, Harry, for the extra. I like knowing that about the Samaritans. I didn't know there were any Samaritans left in the world, so that's good to know. Our reading starts out with Jesus in between Samaria and Galilee. He's in the in-between. We call that a liminal space. It's like this. If you're at your home and you're standing in the doorway, you're not in the house, but you're also not out of the house. Or if you're engaged to be married, you're not married, but you're certainly not single. So what are you? You're somewhere in between. And that's where Jesus is this morning, and that's where he finds these 10 men. Now, living in that liminal space is really difficult. We don't like being in between things. We want to make a choice, move forward. We're either going to go this way or go that way. We don't like the uncertainty of being in between. But that's where Jesus is in this reading. And that's exactly what the translation says, in between. I think that's something we need to think about. He meets these 10 men, and some translations call them lepers. They have an infectious skin disease. Probably not Hansen's disease, maybe it was. But any infection on your skin required that you spend time away from your community. So you are cast out. The priest examines your skin and says, ooh, that's infected. You have to social distance. It's in the Bible, friends. These 10 men are social distanced from everybody else. They cannot come close, otherwise whatever they have will be a contagion to everybody else. So they are in this in-between place where they are begging. And they see Jesus, and they ask for mercy. Notice here they didn't ask for healing. Did they call him Lord? Harry, check your text and tell me if they called him Lord. And even then, I'm not sure that means Jesus as Lord or just Master. Okay. So we're not really even sure if they know who Jesus is. They're begging for whatever they can get. They are living in the in-between, between the living and the dead, and they have no way to support themselves. So they're looking for food, they're looking for anything that people can give them. And of course, Jesus says to them, go show yourselves to the priests, and they go, and on their way, they're healed. And then this one man comes back, the Samaritan returns to say thank you. Now, when I read a story like that, I'm always looking for what doesn't add up in this story. And there are a number of things for me in this particular text that I want answers to. So I've been thinking about this all week. Did these men know that this was Jesus? Were they asking for healing, or were they just asking for a handout? Were they trying to get anything that they could get? When he says, go show yourselves to the priest, did any of them say, why? Did they hesitate? And what priest did they go to? We've got Jewish people and we've got at least one Samaritan, and they did not mix. They had their own religious systems. They had their own priests. So did 9 of them head toward Jerusalem to find a priest, and 1 went to Samaria? I mean, I'm always curious about these things. And then the 9 who do what Jesus said to do, who go to the priest, they're deemed negligent. And the one who disobeyed, who started to go and turned around and came back to thank Jesus, he's celebrated. And this troubles me because I know that if Jesus told me to go show myself to the priest, I would not turn back for anything. I would do exactly what Jesus said, because I was always a good girl in school. I always did what the teacher said. I never got in trouble. I can follow the rules. So if Jesus says go to the priest, I would be going to the priest. I wouldn't stop halfway and come back. And we don't even know if any of these people made it to the priest. None of that is shared in this story. And those kinds of things bug me. And they bug more than just me. Friedrich Schleiermacher, there's a German name for you, in the 18th century said this whole story is negligent. There's just too many holes. We don't know exactly what's going on here. Now I am learning, and I hope that you are learning with me, to trust the storyteller. If the storyteller wanted us to know the answers to all of my questions, they would have been in there. But because they're not there, they don't matter. All the questions I raised, none of those even mattered. The only thing that matters, according to our storyteller today, is that we are funneled right down to that moment when the Samaritan says thank you to Jesus. That's what the story is about, and that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about gratitude. Now, gratitude, I'm sure we all know, is a quality or a perspective. We live with gratitude. It's not a one-time thing, and it has to be cultivated. How many here have taught children to say please and thank you? Again and again and again, and still remembering to say please and thank you. So there's a seed, perhaps, of gratitude in us at birth, but unless it is cultivated, unless it is practiced and learned, we may forget to be grateful. So we have to practice it. It's more than a one-time act. Now, author Ann Voskamp says that gratitude always precedes the miracle. Think about that for a minute. Gratitude comes before the miracle. That's what Ann suggests. She wrote a book called 1,000 Gifts, and in that book she describes her life. I want to share a couple of lines from her book. She says she woke every morning wanting to die. She was a married woman with 6 children, but every morning she woke wanting to die. Death affected her from a very young age. When she was only 4, Ann's little sister Amy, who was 2, toddled out into the path of a truck on their farm. And Ann says she could remember one of her earliest memories, looking out the window and seeing her parents on the porch holding Amy in a blood-stained blanket, crying, keening, wailing, waiting for their baby to open her eyes. Meanwhile, the truck driver is sitting at the kitchen table with his head in his hand, sobbing, "I never saw her. I never saw her." That day, Ann's father lost his faith. He turned away from God, and her mother later spent time in a psychiatric unit. Ann compares that period of time and that response with her brother-in-law, who has laid to rest 2 babies, 2 sons, 2 babies in 2 years, who both inherited the same fatal gene that caused an early death. And her brother-in-law said, "I can accept that there are things in life I don't understand as long as I believe that God does." His strength is incomprehensible. His faith is amazing, and it grows in the face of adversity while Ann's father's faith is gone. And so she's wrestling with this concept of how do we respond when times are difficult. When she wrote her book, 1,000 Gifts, she says, "I wake to the discontent of life in my skin." And that makes me think of our 10 lepers. I'm going to call them lepers, whether they were or not. They were ill. Waking every morning to discontent in their own skin, feeling like their own bodies just betrayed them because they're ill and there's nothing that they can do about it. But Ann says, "I live tired, afraid, anxious, weary, somewhere between fully alive and empty nothingness." It's in the in-between, she writes, that drives us mad. It's the life in between, the days of walking lifeless, of going through the motions, that makes us the wild walking dead. Her life was transformed through gratitude. The Greek word for Thanksgiving in our Bible is Eucharisteo. It's what Jesus said when he lifted the bread and thanked God for it, blessed it, broke it, and shared it with his friends. He said Eucharisteo in our Greek translation. And that word, when broken into its roots, means grace, thanksgiving, and joy. And as Anne studied the scripture, she began to find more and more times when Eucharisteo precedes the miracle. There is gratitude and thanksgiving before the miracle ever happens. And so she begins to hope that if she practices gratitude in her own life, that she will find herself fully alive, no longer living between that space of what she thinks full life would be and this empty nothingness of her days, the constant grind of getting up every day and doing the same things over and over. So she began to practice gratitude using a journal. She began with number 1, morning shadows across old floors. Number 2, jam piled high on toast. Number 3, cry of blue jay from high in the spruce. Notice how ordinary these things are, but she saw them and noted them and thanked God for them. Number 17, the creak of her old knees. How many of you just want to move your knees right now because you know exactly what she's talking about, that creak? Number 18, wind flying cold, wild in hair. Can you remember what it feels like when the wind hits the back of your scalp? If you can't remember, wait about 2 months, you will remember. Now, if Anne is correct and gratitude precedes the miracle, I wonder if the Samaritan was practicing gratitude while he lived in that in-between place as an outcast. And what would he have to give thanks for? So I imagined for a moment living in the in-between with the Samaritan. What would I find to be grateful for? Maybe number 1, sun rays streaming good morning. Or number 2, hump-backed camel plodding. Or number 3, cool water soothing. And especially number 4, Jewish neighbors becoming friends. Because you know, the Jews and the Samaritans never mixed. They didn't even speak. But here, in the in-between, where they are all outcasts, where they are all afflicted, the Samaritan is with the Jewish people. And they must be spending time together, at least in my imagination they are. But illness caused that. Illness brought them together. So I think the Samaritan had been practicing gratitude long before Jesus walked by. And that is why he was insistent on turning back to thank Jesus, because he'd already been cultivating that seed of gratitude in his life. So how can we do that? If we are living in the in-between, when it's difficult. That's a beautiful ringtone. I'm sorry everybody at home couldn't hear that. It was quite lovely. If we're in the in-between, if we're waiting for something to happen, if we're living between being away from home and going home, or in a difficult place in a relationship, or any difficulty at all in life that causes us to feel stuck, if you're in that place, in the in-between, how can we begin to cultivate gratitude? The Samaritan could do it, so I am absolutely sure that we can. Now, the first thing we don't do, of course, when we're feeling terrible is we don't power through it. We don't ignore it and just push on like, honestly, Americans are so good at doing, right? We're just going to plow through it. We're going to be fine. There was a broadcast on TV this week with a government official from Kentucky saying, everybody says we should pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, but our bootstraps went down the river. You know, when you're in that place where you can't move, when you're stuck, how do we cultivate gratitude? Ann Voskamp says the first thing we do is we name it. In the Bible, naming is a way of capturing the essence of something. When Adam gave names to all of the animals in Genesis, that is our example of finding in them the essence of that creature and then naming it. Scholar Alexander Schmemann said that in the Bible, a name reveals the very essence of a thing. And to name a thing is to bless God for it and in it. So we look for God in everything, even the things that hurt. So wherever you are, we look for God in it. And you can name it. My pain today is for so-and-so, or because of this relationship, or because I can't do the things I once could do. You name it. The second thing we do is lament. Lament is a beautiful thing. We are able to express our feelings to God. We get real with how we feel. We don't walk away from it, but we name it and we lament it. There is an Old Testament book called Lamentations, and that book we think was written by a prophet following a national disaster when life was completely turned upside down. Very much in that in-between, the space of being stuck. And the prophet wrote, God has made my flesh and my skin to waste away and broken my bones. God has made me sit in darkness like the dead of long ago. I can imagine those 10 sick men being able to identify with God has made my flesh and my skin to waste away. That's exactly what was happening to them. Now, you might say this sounds like complaining, but there's a big difference between lament and complaint. Complaint speaks it out to God and anyone else who will listen, all of the things that are wrong, but complaint forgets that God is present in it, that God is still with us. Lament speaks it out, lets God know how we feel. We're not surprising God any, are we? But then we remember that God is present in that moment with us, and it gives us hope. And so our prophet in Lamentations goes on after saying, God has broken my bones and left me in darkness. He writes, if I can find it, but this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. Complaint leads to blaming, and it diminishes us. But lament allows us to express how we're feeling and steers us in the direction of hope, so we can move toward a more full life. The third thing we do, we name it, we lament it, and then we practice gratitude in it. So we look at the mess that we're in, and we look for those moments where God is there, where we can find a gift. I tried to do this several years ago when I read Ann's book the first time. And I began to keep a gratitude journal, because I like to write too. Now, I know there are people here, if I say the word journal, you're, no way, can't do that. Too much like schoolwork or homework. I'm not writing anything down. You can always, at night before you lay your head on the pillow, take a moment or two and think about your day and give God thanks for something. Or if you have someone at the dinner table with you, or someone who calls you every day to check in with you, have them ask you, what are you grateful for today? We do that at Thanksgiving. Why don't we do that every day? Just think about those little moments. So I started journaling. And I don't do this every day, I'm on number 2,300 and something, I don't recall. But I pulled out a couple of these really normal, small things in life that I have been grateful for. Of course, coffee made the list like 5 times, but I try not to repeat. So my number 2,217 was morning wren singing. I love wrens. They don't care what time my clock says. If it is 4:45 and they think it's morning, they will start belting out a song. And if you're familiar with wrens, they're about this big, and their pipes are this big. And nobody sleeps when the wren decides that it is time to wake up. I miss the wrens in the wintertime. Then I had number 2,168, ideas springing me from slumber. These things are first thing in the morning. The wren is singing. I have a thought. I've got to get up and write it down or look it up or whatever. That's just the morning. If we can cultivate gratitude all day long, we'll be finding little things that we are grateful for. Today I'm grateful I can wear my walking shoes while I'm in church, and nobody will ever say anything anyway, probably, but it's really nice to be able to do that. These are just small things. But what if Anne is right? What if gratitude precedes the miracle? One of the biggest challenges that we face in our world, whenever I pay attention to everything that's going on in the world, this comes to mind. Our biggest challenge could just be ingratitude. When we are not grateful, we think we're entitled. Whatever we get is our due. It's because we believe that it's ours, and we don't thank people for things that we believe belong to us. We don't receive them as gifts. We become bitter, maybe a little bit less human. Immanuel Kant said that ingratitude degrades the individual and corrupts society. And he said that 200 and some years ago. Isn't that true today? That when we are not grateful for what we have, we act in ways that are less human? Maybe that's why our gospel reading today ignored all of my questions and went straight to that moment when the Samaritan was so grateful. Now, some of us today are in the in-between. We are in a place we don't want to be. And I believe as a church, as Harry pointed out earlier, I think as a church we're in between. I don't know yet which way this ship is going to sail. We'll have to wait and see. But let's not rush to get out of the in-between. Because if Jesus met the Samaritan there, I am absolutely sure Jesus will meet us in that same place. Now, when the Samaritan thanked Jesus, Jesus said, "Go on your way, your faith has saved you," or "your faith has made you well." Those words at the end, in Greek, sozo. It does mean salvation. It means saved. It also means wholeness and full life. The Samaritan was suspended in the in-between, between the living and the dead, and Jesus said, "Go on your way to living, to full life." This is the second miracle in this reading, because the 10 all were healed. Their bodies, their skin was healed. That was the first miracle. But the second miracle was only for the Samaritan who had cultivated gratitude, who thanked Jesus. He received another blessing, another gift. He received full life. Gratitude might just save us too. Now today, before you leave this place, tell God what you are grateful for. Just look around the room. See what little things are here that we can say, "Thank you, God. We are so grateful for this gift." Merci. Grazie. Gracias. Hola. Thank you.